Oh, it says that this thing was. Hi, everybody, and thank you for tuning in today to the second episode of the Responsibility Quotient podcast with myself, Katherine Kowalchuk. I created this podcast a little bit ago, kind of on the fly, because after my advocacy over the last couple of years as a result of COVID, I've come to realize that it's important now more than ever that we stop looking to a savior or a government leader to help us through this topsy-turvy world that we find ourselves in, but rather we look to ourselves and we look into our personal lives, and we dive deep and be the person that we want to be, so that we can affect the change that we want to see. And no matter what I've experienced over the last 4 years or so, it's been very clear that if I'm not emulating the change that I want to see in the world in my personal life, then it's going to be very challenging to convey that message to society in general and to inspire people to make the changes that they need to take in their life in order to ensure that we live in a thriving and prosperous and compassionate and loving society. And my hope is through these podcasts that we will explore different ideas. They'll mostly all be likely controversial because it seems like everything in this day and age is controversial. But I'm hoping to bring on some exciting guests, and we can talk about these challenging topics so that we can find a path forward, hopefully together, so that we can overcome some of the problems that we're experiencing right now. Tonight, I've asked lawyer, colleague of mine, Glenn Blackett with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, to join me today to talk about a myriad of different things we're seeing in the law. Specifically, Glenn is a civil rights lawyer, and he used to be in private practice. And then I think, and Glenn will be on shortly to correct me, but I think it was during COVID where he decided to leave private practice and join the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and take on some charter litigation and really represent people that need representation, because, as you know, our rights and freedoms, generally speaking, in our world have been abridged, and a lot of it doesn't make sense. But what we're also going to talk about today is a little bit about how judges influence lawmaking in our country, and also the creep of this social creep that is, or the cultural creep that is bombarded our institutions, our judiciary, our governments, and everything from the police to the College of Physicians and Surgeons to the Law Society of Alberta to our post-secondary institutions. We all seem to have been captivated by diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a progressive agenda that I believe is taking our province and our country backwards. And so without further ado, I will be adding Glenn to the stage here. Hi, Glenn.
Hey,
How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing to do this. I think that these conversations are really important to have because there's a lot of information that we get from primarily, I would think, social media these days. And we have a lot of people who are suffering a lot because they're finding that the world that they grew up thinking that made sense to them, the rules are constantly changing, and I think that's very true for lawyers in particular. I'm a family law lawyer. and I don't do constitutional law, but I've been thrust into doing some sort of constitutional analysis since the advent of COVID. But I think that what's really piqued my interest over the last number of years, having to deal with COVID and thinking about where we derive our rights and freedoms and how our governments influence it, really how civil liberties seem to be treated these days vis-a-vis the charter, which I think a lot of people had assumed the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was this wonderful document that was going to save us all. And it's been actually kind of the opposite experience. So I want to talk about all of these issues, but first off, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with the Justice Center?
Sure. So probably it started when I was in university. I took political science. I studied under Ted Morton, Tom Flanagan, Barry Cooper, and various other sort of what we would now call extreme right wing thinkers, who taught me the value of this thing called liberal democracy and taught me basically how it's supposed to function. And I departed from my political science degree thinking that I understood both liberal democracy and that most people understood liberal democracy. And so I went off about my life and I got into private practice as a lawyer. Did fine as a lawyer. And then, as you said in the introduction there, COVID really kind of broke my brain. It woke me up to the reality that I think what it woke me up to the reality mostly was that civil rights depends entirely on citizens observing one another's civil rights. And and again, like you brought up in your introduction, it's not so much the government that gives us rights, although I don't think I'd ever quite claim that was my belief, but that those civil liberties really depended on person-to-person interaction. And I saw during COVID how that really just was sort of an illusion that there was these civil rights between us, and that people observed civil rights, and as soon as there seemed to be the first opportunity for the herd to violate in a massive way one another's civil rights, they took it. I found that they didn't just take it, they took it without any rational thought. I had a real trouble during COVID, and I'm sure many people, I would guess anyone listening to this podcast had the same experience, which was it wasn't merely that you didn't agree with people about COVID policies, you couldn't have a rational conversation with them. And so it spooked me, and it made me realize that liberal democracy is hanging in the balance, and I should devote my legal skills, meager as they may be, to the fight for civil rights. So that's what got me into it. And most recently, I came across John Carpe and the Justice Center. They did a lot of kind of scrappy civil rights work, which I had to admire from the sidelines. And when I decided I wanted to get out and do something to help civil rights, that was kind of a natural selection. So I got in touch with John, and thank God John hired me. So here I am.
Well, I'm glad he did too. One of the things that I want to talk about, sorry, I just need to edit something here because Facebook isn't allowing me to broadcast this. It's on X right now, but Facebook is not allowing me to broadcast this. So anyway,
If you want to
But
pause, go nuts.
no, that's okay. You and I went to law school together. We went
Yeah, we did.
to UC Law School, and
Yeah.
then we didn't see each other. I mean, you were doing civil litigation, I understand, and then I was doing, I was a solicitor for a very long time, and then I delved into family law for probably just over now a decade now. I've been focusing exclusively on family law. But then yeah, we were reunited, I guess, through COVID and through this advocacy work that we are doing. And now you and I find ourselves in a situation where we are well, I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I certainly look around the world right now, in Alberta and Canada, in our profession, and I don't actually recognize it any longer, to be
Yeah.
honest. It's funny because it's not funny, but it's a lot of people during COVID, and even now, because there's so many injustices that are occurring. They want lawyers to jump in, and they want to bring a lawsuit, and they want justice to occur. I don't know about you, and I'd like your comments on this. But what I've seen through various decisions across the country, mootness applications, courts refusing to hear applications in some cases. Um, what we're seeing is that our judiciary has um, it doesn't matter. What I'm trying to say is it doesn't matter how great of a lawyer you are or how good the arguments are. What we're experiencing right now is something different. And that is, I think, by and large, this progressive movement that has captivated all of our institutions, including our judiciary. And this is influencing how judges are deciding cases and interpreting the law, and then invariably making law. Because when legislation is poorly drafted or vague, that's when the courts come in and they interpret what the law means, and in relation to a particular fact scenario, right? And so I just had this dialogue with somebody just a couple of days ago where, they're quite animated and frustrated that lawyers aren't doing more. And what I tried to explain to this person was that, well, even if you had like the best lawyer on the planet and the best fact scenario that you are almost positive you're going to win on, our judiciary is functioning right now in such a predictable, although albeit becoming more predictable manner. Um, they're making rulings and deciding cases that I think has stunned a lot of lawyers, because we weren't really aware just how this social justice activism has kind of captivated the judiciary. So even if you had the best fact scenario, the law's on your side, we're seeing this progressive ideology creeping in and influencing the decisions that are being made. And so my go-to, or my argument to these people is that, right now I'm not even sure that it's a good thing to bring legal like cases to the judiciary at this point. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot there. I mean, I think that, I think one of the things I've noticed that when I read charter cases, especially, but other constitutional cases as well. I mean, I didn't read a lot of constitutional cases when I was in private practice because it just wasn't an issue. I was doing builder's liens and kind of boring stuff, so it didn't come up. But the more charter cases I realize, the more charter cases I read, the more I realize that wokeness has been creeping into case law for a long time. Definitely since the charter, I think since immediately after the charter really started to bleed in, whether it was there before or not, I don't know, but it's been there for a while. I'm sure there's a lot of diversity on the bench. I'm sure there's some judges that view their role as being the neutral arbiter of the law, where their job is to, discern as best they can what the laws are, and then apply them without, inserting themselves or their own political interests into the deal. I'm not so sure that every judge sees it that way, and I'm not sure that, I'm not sure that. I guess I would say, just like COVID taught me that, that civil rights depend on the personalities in the country. People have to have sort of a gut full of civil rights and treat one another, liberally in order to have a liberal democracy. Really, the way the judge thinks depends, or sorry, the way the judge thinks dictates how they decide cases, which is kind of obvious. I mean, I think the outsider's perspective on the law is that it's, there's a rule, you read the rule. How does this rule apply in a certain situation? And you just apply the rule. But once you get into about minute 12 or 13 of law school, you realize that even the simplest rules are pretty complex, and there's a lot of judgment that goes on in terms of how you apply that. So the personality of the judge makes a huge difference. And judges are human. So, along with the rest of and I mean, I got to be careful, but let's assume for a moment that COVID was a manifestation of a mass formation, which I'm guessing you know what that means, right? Mass formation.
Yeah, but do you want to maybe just explain a little bit for people who may
Yeah,
not?
sure. I mean, as I understand it, and I don't understand it very well, but the idea is that, kind of like the Salem witch trials or the Holocaust or the Dreyfus affair, or I don't know, some other things. A certain kind of madness of the crowd will take over, and people will not be motivated so much by what they know and what their pre-existing values were, but rather will be just motivated by whatever the herd's doing. So it's kind of herd mentality. But I think that so mass formation, I think what it means more technically is that the mass will form around a sort of an irrational concept, and will sort of follow along. So a bunch of people will start to believe in something which is not entirely rational. And there's a certain power in the number of people who believe it, so that everyone gets caught up in this thing. And so, and I think I don't know who coined the phrase, but I think it came out of the, what's it called? The Madness of Crowds. Is that the book? Anyway, but
Well, I do know that Dr. Matthias Desmet has spoken a lot about the mass psychosis or mass formation psychosis, I think is how he refers to it, right?
Right.
That when people are kind of depressed and detached from one another, which is I never really thought of our world being like that, or the people in our world by and large being like that. But upon reflection, it is this kind of detachment from um, from being with others, right? And because we lead these individual type lives, and we are disconnected, and to the extent that we are connected, typically, like you and I here today, we're conversing via screen. So it's quite different. I mean, it's different than when I grew up. I mean, I didn't have a cell phone until I was like 25 years old. When I first got my first BlackBerry, I was shocked and excited at the same time that I could get email right in the bar drinking a beer.
Yeah.
So I was pretty thrilled with that. But I think what's happened is that that's also helped to cause separation between people as well.
Right. Although I think that, I mean, like that herd mentality, that irrational herd mentality pre-existed, our most recent alienation from one another. Like the Salem witch trials happened in Salem, Massachusetts, where it was quite a small community and none of them had cell phones.
True.
And the Dreyfus Affair happened in 1895 or something like that. So it's, it's kind of a human condition where we just get caught up in these social movements that we don't really we think we understand, we think it's sort of rational, we think it all kind of makes sense, but that's sort of the nature of humans, is that we can get caught up in these things, where if we had, really stepped outside of that mob and thought about it rationally, we'd see that, okay, well, there's definitely some problems in this behavior somewhere. But so my point is that this herd mentality or madness of the crowd or mass formation, whatever you want to call it, it's something that affects everybody, and it affects judges too. And so I think that when everybody gets all crazy about COVID and gets all terrified about the thought of catching COVID, I think judges get terrified about the thought of catching COVID too. And when people's brains shut off, when thinking about the sort of the reasons that a person should or should not violate another person's civil liberties, there's really no reason that a judge is better insulated from that proclivity than any other person. So, I guess what I'm saying is that judges are humans. The law is a bit fuzzy anyway, and it requires some sort of, human input in order to make decisions. And so we shouldn't really be surprised that judges can be caught up in these different movements. And I think that's what we see. I think we see judges caught up in these movements.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And then as a result, yeah, I'd like to think that there's no, nefarious intent behind what's happening here, right? But when you and I were talking over the last weekend about, what we were going to talk about today, it came up like there's a battle between civil liberties and the charter, and we look to, the charter to uphold our civil liberties, but that's actually not what's occurring. And from what I can tell, this has been happening for decades. I personally think that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms needs to be completely scrapped. I think that Section 1 especially is extremely problematic, and it needs to be scrapped just simply because of how it's being used and abused and against people right now, by and large, and that how easy it is for the government to completely override all of our rights and freedoms, based on absolutely zero evidence, and the fact that the judiciary is quite happy to take judicial notice, which is a concept in law where these judges are assuming certain facts to be so notoriously true that you don't have to demonstrate the veracity or the truth of its existence. Like, for instance, we can all agree on certain things like the sky is blue when there's no chemtrails, and things like that. But that what they did with the COVID litigation, in particular, was that they took judicial notice of the fact that there was a pandemic, for instance, the fact that vaccines were safe and effective. And so, the charter has been actually used, I think, against us, under this guise of, wanting to protect all of the citizens, and make sure everybody's, safe and always protected. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you see civil liberties being affected by the implementation of the charter and some of these decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you that the charter is, well, and I mean, if John Carpe heard this, he'd be upset with me, but I don't think the charter is necessarily just inherently a good idea. And I don't think it's inherently a good idea because, and this seems to shock a lot of people, before 1982, when the charter was passed, we were a liberal democracy. somehow we maintain these civil rights in a liberal democratic political system, even though we didn't have a list of rights written down in our Constitution. And so the question becomes, well, how could that be? And the answer is, again, we understood civics. We understood what liberal democracy meant. And we, basically, I think through a cumulative effect of everyone's sort of decision making, including judges, politicians, police, everybody, we sort of implemented case by case liberal democracy in our daily lives. We understood it. And as soon as we decided, okay, well, liberal democracy is easy as just writing it down on a piece of paper and writing down, oh, I have this right and I have that right. I think it dumbed down the process, and it made us kind of, civically literate or illiterate. Instead of having sort of a complex idea of what that meant and what our responsibilities are and stuff, we got the idea, I think, that, oh, it's as simple as writing down a list, and then if somebody violates it, you just go to court and, Bob's your uncle, you've got civil rights. But there's so much wrong with that model, So, I'd say, there's a lot wrong with that model. One thing that's wrong with that model is if you write down, for example, I don't know, take your pick. You have freedom of conscience. Well, that's nice. But when do you enjoy that freedom of conscience, and when has it been infringed? Well, that requires a lot of judgment to determine whether there's a situation where you enjoy that right and whether that right has been infringed. And the other issue is, or the other complexity is, rights interact, right? So you have, my right to swing my arm ends at the end of your nose, right? Which is the old saying, but meaning that it's one thing to claim a right, but to just claim this absolute right is to basically say, and there's nothing that can interfere with this right, damn y'all, right? Damn all your rights, I take my rights. And so it becomes a sort of weird, scramble for the first person to run to court gets their rights enforced or something. So it's kind of this, it's a very unsophisticated understanding of rights, I think. And then to your point, Section 1 becomes the next problem, which I personally think Section 1 is necessary. Like you can't say, well, I have a right of freedom of religion, and so I can just exercise that right in every situation, no matter the consequences, forget society's interests, forget every other competing right. There's got to be give and take. Right?
But okay, so let's talk about this a little bit, because you say, we were fine before the charter. We lived in a liberal democracy, and we understood what the rules of the game were and how to conduct ourselves. By and large, we understood what kind of the difference between right and wrong. But what I'm seeing now is that why that Section 1 in allowing the government to infringe upon our rights and freedoms is so problematic, and allowing judges to interpret laws is so problematic, is because I don't think we're in a society anymore where we actually do agree what's right and wrong. And so, we have this progressive socialism that is has kind of flooded into almost every institution. Well, I think every institution. And so, if you accept the argument that we were a country based upon some fundamental principles, right? We have a Judeo-Christian heritage. Our laws were formed under these sort of understandings and this moral compass, if you will. And over, since some Confederation, obviously God and religion has been removed from the lexicon of government and our laws, under the guise that it's better to have like a more secular approach to things. But then you enter in the LGBTQ, et cetera, rights and pride and all the rest of it, which seems to run contrary to at least how I grew up anyway. And so we have this situation where our values seem to be in conflict with one another, but this one particular set of values or this progressive socialism that is running amok right now seems to be the predominant force. And so you have a problem where you have a society that doesn't now agree to play by the same rules. It's kind of dangerous territory, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I mean, socialism killed a lot of people. So socialism is super evil. And I wish more Canadians knew that woke is socialism. I mean, so you're connecting that with section 1. And I can't remember exactly section 1, but it
Well,
says something
I am because if we're looking at decision makers to interpret, like to make law and to interpret the law, like so the legislatures to make law and the judiciary to interpret the law, right? And if they're captivated by a certain political ideology, how, which they seem to be by and large. I mean, the Chief Justice Wagner of the Supreme Court of Canada is proud to announce that we are it's the most progressive Supreme Court in all the world. So when you have a certain political ideology that has captured the attention of these institutions that we're looking to right these wrongs, I mean, it's kind of a fool's errand from what I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's kind of two parts that. One is that it demonstrates the importance of the personality of the judge making the decision, right? Which goes back to what we started with, which was that a law isn't as simple as a person just reading it and going, oh, okay, here's how it applies, and then applying it, right? There's always some judgment that's required, and to the extent that your judge is infected with socialism or socialist thinking, then that's going to impact how that judge applies the law. For sure. I agree. But to go back to section 1, my point is that if you read section 1, it doesn't by its words suggest that a judge can interfere with rights on some socialist basis, because it talks about the supremacy of God and a free and democratic society. And a socialist state neither has God as a supreme nor even an extant, value,
Right.
nor is it a liberal democracy, i.e., a free and democratic society. So I guess if we do a thought experiment where the judge actually reads the words and tries as hard as he or she can to interpret it, I think that a judge, even if the judge is a socialist and wants a socialist outcome, can't read the words in section 1, supremacy of God and free and democratic society, in any way that would be amenable to socialism. And this is
sure, but when you look at section, I think 27 of the charter, it talks about how the charter is to be interpreted, and it's to be interpreted through a multicultural lens, which is really actually has nothing to do with God, the supremacy of God, or the rule of law necessarily, right? And then so I would agree with you, but as you pointed out, socialists would see it differently, and I think part of the problem is that most people, or perhaps, I mean, I may be giving these people a big benefit of the doubt, but I don't actually think that they realize what it is that they're practicing.
Yeah, I think that's one of my, there's these sort of gnawing questions that you have in your mind. And one of them is, do people really believe this stuff? Right? Like, I mean, if
Yeah.
you, I mean, you know that I'm involved with a lawsuit against the Law Society of Alberta. The Law Society's gone woke. You read the materials that the Law Society has, and it's absolute madness. It's madness.
Yeah.
And one interesting little anecdote. One of the particularly mad items on the Law Society's website is a resource they link to. And the resource, I'm trying to remember the details of it. I can't remember, but it was some pernicious little item on the Law Society's website. And when a news organization reached out to the Law Society for comment on this kind of unusual resource, the Law Society said, "Oh, well, you don't have to pay attention to that one." So don't you? I mean, I don't understand what that means.
Well,
I mean, why do you have it on the Law Society's website if we don't have to read it? Right?
Right. So maybe let's talk about this for the viewers here about, you and I are both a part of this organization called the Council of Alberta Lawyers.
Yep.
And you and I were both signed a petition a few years ago that was initiated by a colleague of ours, Roger Song. And and the petition related to a rule that the Law Society granted itself, incidentally during COVID, that permitted them to essentially mandate cultural competency training for lawyers. And they thought it was a great idea. They implemented this rule, and this cultural competency training was a condition to us practicing law. And the first course in this cultural competency training was called the Path. And that the Path, I guess, was designed to give us a history of Aboriginal rights and the history of Aboriginals in our country, so that with the idea that the more that we know, it will help us become a better society, right? Because we'll understand the plight of the Indigenous people and then be motivated to want to create programs and situations within our legal framework so that we become a more inclusive society, I guess, as a result of our understanding this. But Roger took issue with this, as did we, not necessarily about the Path course per se, but the fact that the Law Society, who had declared in and around that time that our profession in Alberta was systemically racist, as at the same time that we needed this training as lawyers as a condition to practicing law. So if we didn't take the course and if we didn't pass the course, we weren't going to be able to practice law.
Right.
And so a bunch of us lawyers got together and we forced a special general meeting of the Law Society of Alberta so that we could repeal this rule that they had given themselves to allow this cultural competency training to occur. And at that meeting, it was conducted via Zoom, of course, because it was through COVID. And at that meeting, we lost. The majority of the lawyers who attended completely conflated the argument to be something that it was not. They referred to us as being racist and all the rest of the slurs that you would use against us were white right wing and all the rest of it, because it just happened to be this course that was the product of the rule that granted them this authority, and we lost that. So
although I just add that they imposed the training before they passed the rule.
That's right. Yeah, explain that maybe perhaps to people.
Well, they imposed the training, and then I don't know why, but they probably realized that they didn't actually have any authority to do so. So they decided, oh, we better also have a rule that allows us to do it. So they passed a rule to allow themselves to do it.
Exactly. And so, but as the result of that, can you explain what you and Roger decided to do?
Yeah, we sued the Law Society, basically. I mean, we've done three things, right? I mean, you and I and Roger and a bunch of people helped on that petition, and we got. I actually was pretty happy with our outcome. We had 850 or something votes on our side, and we had about 3,000 something votes against. I think you're right that there was this kind of conflation, and this is something that drives me crazy about our modern society. You know, we read headlines, we don't read past them. We see that there's a lawyer opposed to the path, ergo he's a racist, or just some bigot, or just some idiot. There's very few people who actually delve into the detail of that. I understand that there was a lot of pressure in large firms to have numbers come out for that meeting and to vote against the motion to strike down that rule, which I think is pretty interesting. Again, you know, I'll go back to my hobby horse that in order to live in a liberal democracy, we have to behave liberally and democratically. It's not very liberal democratic to tell your employees how to vote on something. I don't think. But I think that's what happened in large measure. And I think, you know, I mean, we saw that when we struggled to get out our message effectively, to communicate with our 10,000 fellow lawyers why it is we oppose this rule. Hoping that a number of lawyers would actually care to think about it. And it was very difficult to get out that message. It was, I mean, I'm sure that you've noticed this in COVID as well. COVID seems to be my go-to for all things, modern. But even if you can sit down with a person and talk to them face to face, it's very hard to make any kind of progress with a person, So I didn't expect that if we were able to communicate with 10,000 lawyers, we would really make any progress, but I hope there might be a few people that would, see the light. But the Law Society sent out their own message of support for themselves. And then they refused to circulate any message on our behalf. And so we had a real trouble sort of communicating with the people who were going to make this vote. And if you were to think about concepts of procedural fairness, it didn't seem to be very procedurally fair. There seemed to be a use of statutory power to put their I would say their finger, but probably their whole torso onto the scale to throw the vote. And lo and behold, we lost the vote, which is not to say that, I totally believe that if I could sit down and spend 2 hours with every single lawyer in Alberta, we still would have lost the vote, because it's very hard to make progress with a person when you talk to them over a short period of time. It takes a very long time. But nonetheless, we lost the vote. But we had 850 people show up and oppose it, which, that to me, that suggests that there may be as much as sort of 25%, 30% of the bar that sees a problem, which is a great, seed. And I hope we can sort of intrigue those people to think more about the problems we have with our law society. And then we got together a bunch of lawyers and citizens and professors and such, and we did a letter to the Law Society and to the Minister of Justice and to the Premier, complaining about the fact that the Law Society had adopted a political objective, which I read the news every day and I see all sorts of troubling things. I see an open US border. I see the Ukrainian war. I see Putin. I see this. I see that. But in Canada, I really can't think of something any more dangerous than a law society adopting a political objective, which sounds bookish and weird and niche, but I think that if you're concerned about the sort of socialist drift of our society, you should be profoundly concerned about the lawyers being influenced to become socialist,
Yeah.
which is, I think, what's happening. And I'm reinforced in my views based on what Roger Song has to say in his affidavit. So that's the next step. We wrote to the government. The government responded with a dismissive letter about how important it is for the Law Society to get into education. And the Law Society had an insultingly short letter in response that said, it was one line that said, "Thank you for sharing your thoughts this way," or something like that. It was just quite the dismissive letter to a number of, I think, thoughtful and concerned citizens.
Yeah, here's the website here, where the pleadings are, and Roger's affidavit can be found,
Right.
and it's at the Council of Alberta Lawyers.ca, just in case anybody is curious about that. But go on.
Yeah. So the letter's there, and then the next, these three items, the petition, the letter, and then Roger Song's lawsuit, are all under that heading there. Our work on Council of Alberta Lawyers.ca. So then the next thing that we did was Roger sued the Law Society. And so, and Roger's
what was that about? What can you tell us just about, like, what exactly is his claim?
His claim is just that there's something profoundly unconstitutional and illiberal and undemocratic about a law society assuming a political objective. And I'll explain it maybe three ways, or three components of that. One is, we talked about the fact that the way a judge thinks determines how the judge goes about making decisions. Well, the way a lawyer thinks also determines how the lawyer goes about making decisions. So if you change the way a lawyer thinks about the law, then you can change the way the lawyer applies the law effectively. It advises clients about the law, pursues the client's interest, or doesn't pursue the client's interest under the law. So if you can take 10,000 lawyers and change the way they think about the law, then you can effectively change the law.
Exactly. And that's kind of my point with when you're part of a society where you think that certain rules apply, and then over a course of many decades, our institutions and everything seems to be shifting towards this political left socialist agenda. You can't trust it anymore. Like the integrity of the institution is diminished. And when I speak to people, my message is that we really need to examine the danger of all of this and why we're not getting where we need to get to. It's because our education system, like the indoctrination, starts very early on in our education system. We're seeing that right now. We can talk about, parental rights and stuff like that if we have time later on, and what's happening in our society from that perspective. But related to the law, we have these kids graduating from high school, they're going to university. So let's take the University of Calgary Law School, for example. They have an affirmative action path for admission, for instance. And if you go to the University of Calgary Law School, they are proudly displaying DEI, all of these initiatives around Agenda 2030 that is being ushered in by the World Economic Forum. And so our law school here will allow Black students to be admitted into law school under a different stream other than a meritorious stream, right? By your grades in the LSAT, for instance, where you can write your lived experience as a method of getting into law school. And then when you're in law school, the University of Calgary Faculty of Law is committed to basically incorporating all of everything that they do, pretty much from admission to how courses are taught under the lens of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And so these students are coming out of these universities trained with the socialist ideology, and they become lawyers. And even in our lawyers, you'll have some that are proudly wearing their rainbow tabs to court and all the rest of it, right? Yes. And so, and then you have, and then these people are influenced, these lawyers are influenced by the law societies. And you brought something up very earlier today about perhaps larger law firms influencing how their members of their firm were going to be voting in our challenge to the rule that we presented in our petition. And so and then the law society has this progressive socialist agenda that they've adopted wholeheartedly and fully support and incorporate DEI in absolutely everything and into our what's it, our training and our continuing education for lawyers that we've always had to go through. And then these people become judges. So it's no wonder that we're not getting anywhere, because this is like this has metastasized to such an extent that I don't even see how we get out of it other than bringing this to the attention of everyday citizens so they understand that it's not as easy as just, okay, we're gonna sue the government because they're abridging our rights and freedoms. We have to realize the beast that we're working within, and that it's no longer playing by the rules that we thought that they were playing by, or that we thought that we were playing by. So I know that was a kind of a tangent, but I get really, I'm really passionate about it because all of this is all interrelated, right? Roger, is from China, and he went through the Cultural Revolution in China. And so when he saw what the Law Society was doing by imposing this mandatory education upon lawyers, he was beside himself, and he moved to Canada to avoid that, right? Like he understood the dangers of what it was like to live in that cultural revolution in China. And now we see that it's coming here in Canada, and it's being celebrated by absolutely every institution.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's celebrated because either people don't understand the evils of communism, like our environment minister that calls himself a social or a proud socialist. I mean, I don't know. I always think it's kind of funny, don't you, that everyone understands Nazi as a really bad insult and a thing that no one would ever want to be, because, the Nazis put 6 million Jews in concentration camps and killed them, and that's really bad. But 100 million people killed by Mao Zedong, nobody talks about Maoism.
Nobody talks about that, and nobody talks about Stalin and the tens of millions of people that Lenin and Stalin right. murdered in the Bolshevik Revolution, and this history that we are not really allowed to talk about, that the Allies weren't actually that friendly. I mean, the world after World War II, the war didn't necessarily end. There were still labor camps, and they were run by some of the Allies, including England. And I was reading this really interesting book called The White Pill about the history of communism, and I was actually terrified by it because of all the striking resemblances that we're seeing now. And I brought this up in previous podcasts, and I'm going to see if I can find it. It's called The White Pill, and I think everybody should read it if possible. And I'll see if I can bring it up here. It's pill, a tale of good and evil, but it gives a good understanding or history of the politics of what was happening during that time. And I'll just bring it up. There we go. Oh, hold on. And understanding the actual dangers of socialism. And in fact, what happened in that case, when the socialists,
Is that Margaret Thatcher? I'm seeing Hannah Arendt, Margaret Thatcher, Roosevelt's wife, and I don't know, who is that?
who are we here?
They don't look like socialists.
Yeah. Yeah, they are.
Anyway.
Well, I was talking about, the socialists, like part of it, part of the socialist movement in America, what ended up happening was Stalin ended up actually betraying the socialists that thought that they had solved the problems of the world through this political ideology, but then Stalin couldn't trust them either because, well,
the revolution,
he was a tyrant. It does, right? And that's what ends up happening. But we're losing this history in our society right now because it's not being taught. And
and when we hear about Nazis,
problematic.
we're not reminded that Nazis were socialists. Yeah.
No, exactly. It was National Socialism.
Yeah, I mean, kids learn about the evils of residential schooling. They learn about the evils of capitalism. They learn probably about the evils of liberalism, but they don't learn about the evils of the thing that killed, more humans than any other human, thing ever, which is socialism, and I think a lot of people still have childlike approach towards socialism, which is that, it sounds nice. It really does sound nice, right? So I think some people don't. I think some people who understand that it's socialism don't understand how evil socialism is. And I think that most people just don't know that it's socialism. It sounds kind of nutty to you. I mean, if you said a woke is socialism, most people think woke is an insult, and to call it socialism is just being hyperbolic, but it's not. I mean, it is quite literally socialism. And I don't think that most people understand that.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, when you were talking about the law school and the merit, the non-merit based selection, which then I think a lot of schools realize that once they've decided to get away from merit-based selection on entrance, then by logical necessity and by practical necessity, they also have to do something about the merit-based, grading of exams, because now you got a bit of diversity, let's call it, in merit. So it starts
or
to
competency.
Really, it starts to really corrode, academic integrity, I think. And so then you have this law school, and then you have the firms, and then you have the law society itself, and then I think increasingly you have the bench. And as you point out, Justice Wagner calls the Supreme Court the most progressive in the world. What he means by that, I don't know. I think he means what everyone else means, which is woke. But what I've described that as is a system-wide collapse.
Yeah,
right.
It is a system-wide collapse, and I think that it's our job, and that's part of the reason why I love having conversations with you, is because you see it. You're one of the few lawyers in this country that do see it. Certainly, there are others, but I think this is just so important to convey to people, because it's not an easy fix, and it's not easy because a lot of people are being silenced, and we're being canceled, and we're losing jobs, and we're getting fired, and we're not able to have this dialogue that we desperately need in this country right now and in our province. And so and really, this is like it's a big warning to people that we need to snap out of it. We need to snap out of it. And for myself, Like I think it starts from within, and that's why I'm so I really believe in taking personal responsibility and accountability and seeing responsibility as like a virtue that we should aspire to and reclaim and and how do we do that? Well, we have to show up in our lives, and we have to show up in all aspects, including our work and friends and family, which means if you don't agree with what's happening, despite the the consequences, and I know that it's challenging, we have to do our best to stand up against this and say no.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I read recently Elie Wiesel's Midnight. I don't know if you've read that. It's
No,
like
I haven't.
it's an autobiography by a person who survived the concentration camps and in the Holocaust. And one of the things that really I guess most struck me was a character, not a character, an actual human, that he called Moshe the Beetle. And Moshe the Beetle was a guy who was Jewish and lived in a neighboring community. I can't remember where they lived, in Romania. I think they lived in Romania. Lived in a neighboring community, one that was, I guess, closer to the front. And so trying to remember how this all worked, but anyway, he basically got loaded into a train and taken out to a field and walked out into a field, and him and a number of other people were shot. He didn't get shot. He fell into the hole and covered himself with other people and survived miraculously, and then came back to a neighboring town, the town that Elie Wiesel lived in, to tell them, like, this is serious, man. They took us all. They put us in a train and they shot us, and all these people are dead. You got to get out of here. You got to run. You got to flee. And
Yeah.
the sad and terrifying part of that autobiography is that nobody believed him. And Moshe the Beetle became this, you know, oddball in town that everyone just thought was kind of crazy. And so they didn't listen to him. So, and this is when you got Nazis, 50 kilometers away, and still the community thinks, let's not overstate the danger. Everything will be fine. I mean, I think that some people, either through experience or education, can see what we're dealing with and can see what's coming, but it's so hard to communicate the danger to people. They don't,
Yeah.
even if you were taken out into a ditch and shot at, and a bunch of your co-villagers were murdered, you can go to the neighboring village and tell them about it, and they won't believe you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that entire community found itself in a ghetto, and then later in Auschwitz. And,
Right.
so I mean, it's a serious problem. I mean, it's a problem for people it's a problem to sit down with a person and talk to them. It's a quadruple problem to sit down and convince them that there's actually a problem. So I think I don't know. There's blue pill, red pill, and black pill. The blue pills are people who are like, Neo in the Matrix at the beginning. They don't know that there's this ugly reality, and they don't want to know about it. There's the red pills who know that there's this ugly reality. And then there's the black pills who know it's an ugly reality and give up, and so it's, I don't know about you. Do you find yourself sort of vacillating between red pill and black pill?
Every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I do actually, and it is a roller coaster, and it is, because the world that I grew up in doesn't really exist anymore. The values that we've shared between our common, um, there's no humanity. It doesn't seem like anymore, and I've tried politics. I haven't necessarily given up on that entirely, but I see that really in order for us to change anything, we have to have the will to do it. And so my biggest ask or hope is that people will understand that we have to start, it would be really wise, I think, for people to have an open mind um, and think about the real consequences and implications of what it is that's happening right now, and how, and if we can play that tape to the end, what that looks like for our children and our grandchildren. And we don't seem to have a politically motivated government. We see, even the Smith government, as many people are, seem to be championing her, what she's doing on some levels, but all I see is manipulation of the masses. Like, I see a net zero 2050 agenda. I see a commitment to increase double immigration by 2050. She's declared that. I see through this supposed parents' rights initiative that she's undertaken that,
Who's she?
really what she's, pardon me?
Who's she?
Danielle Smith.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that, with this, with the parent rights stuff that she's incorporating into law, I haven't seen the legislation yet, but she hasn't eradicated this gender ideology from being taught in our schools, which is completely dangerous and abusive to our children.
Well, that's,
It,
that parental rights thing, just to pause for a moment, that's, to circle back to, my thought that liberal democracy requires people to be liberal. One of the concepts we used to have and understand was that we were free to do whatever the hell we wanted, unless there was some kind of a limit or something, a reasonable limit based on democratic liberal principles. But we started from the premise of full freedom to do whatever the hell we wanted. And the idea that where government tried to interfere with those rights, it was a major infraction, and it better be well justified and legal and etc. And we've now got ourselves to this idea where, Danielle Smith is now implementing some parental rights as if they didn't exist until the government gave them to us. So it's
I
this
know.
kind of inversion of liberalism. Liberalism means I'm free to do whatever I want, minus whatever the government can properly infringe. We've now all, accepted this premise that liberalism means we get whatever rights, the government hands to us. Sir, may I please have some more rights? No. Okay, well, I guess I don't have those rights.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, we, I really do believe that there's something to, like, we were all playing, I think, under certain rules of morality as well. Like, we all understood what was right and wrong, and we don't have that anymore, because it's not right to, in my opinion, and I think that a vast majority of Albertans actually feel this way. In fact, although they're silent about it, I do believe that this to be the case, that they don't believe that it is possible for somebody to change their sex, and it's actually criminal to to mutilate somebody's body parts, especially when they're minor, and they don't have the capacity to consent. And it's more egregious, or just as egregious, to deny parents' involvement in any of that and to keep it secret.
It's like giving a what's that? It's like giving an anorexic liposuction.
Yeah.
You would never do that,
No.
but now we do. Now we chop our kids up and we call it healthcare. It's obscene.
Yeah, it is obscene.
Weird. I mean, I think I think that the problem we have is that, let's say we have kind of three segments of society. One segment are people like us that understand what liberal democracy is and understand what's an assault on it, and are, fairly sophisticated in our understanding of the problem. And then there's the ideologues on the left who likewise understand the problem and quite enjoy the problem and created the problem and are promoting the problem because that's how they're going to advance their objectives. And then there's everyone in the middle who can't distinguish between liberalism and wokeness. They don't understand that wokeness is the dead body of liberalism, or rather, wokeness is socialism wearing the face of liberalism. Socialism
Mhm.
wearing the face of liberalism. It's not,
Mhm.
it dresses itself up as liberalism, and people still believe that it is liberalism. I mean, you hear
Yeah.
about diversity and inclusion and equity, and all those concepts are things that if you talk to someone 50 years ago, they'd be like, well, those seem like, very good liberal democratic principles, diversity, of course, diversity, right? I mean, that's the whole, I mean, that's almost the entire premise of liberal democracy, is that you need to have a diversity of voices and a diversity of thought and expression. And through that diversity of thought and expression, we're going to find some sort of collective truth and good, and we're going to make decisions based on that. But those words now are still used, and I think there's a lot of people that don't understand that when those words are used, they mean the exact opposite, right?
Yeah.
Diversity means uniformity and the Borg, and inclusion means exclusion of
Yeah.
heterodox thinkers, right? And equity means communism. Right?
It does.
People don't know that. And so I think it's, yeah, I mean, I think that maybe the most important challenge is making, I think maybe two parts. One is making those people in the middle understand that they're being sold a bill of goods, right? The thing that they think is an extension of uh of Martin Luther King is actually a violation of Martin Luther King's dream. And that's something I keep going back to. That's a well I keep going back to. The idea that we should judge a person by the content of their character, not the
Mhm.
color of their skin. I think that's something that 95% of Canadians believe in their bones is important. And there's and 94% of Canadians don't understand that wokeness is the exact opposite of that, right? And so
Yeah.
part of it is sort of trying to educate people, or give, not educate, but warn people that this thing is not Martin Luther
Mhm.
King's dream. And then the other part of it is, I think, having a competing and and you know inspirational sort of counter message, which is, I think, ultimately just liberal democracy. It's having faith in our institutions again. It's trying to restore, I mean, for example, like what's it called? The what's that Pinker, Steven Pinker book? Enlightenment Now, right? I
I
mean,
don't
that's a
know.
book that he wrote to make, anyway, Steven Pinker is a guy who wrote a book called Enlightenment Now, and the point of the book is to remind you of the incredible advance in human flourishing that the Enlightenment brought about, you know? And I think maybe Jordan Peterson's ARC Foundation is a similar sort of a movement, like trying to, in a godless world, provide people some inspiration and something to rally around, right? Because we do a lot of sort of talking about what doesn't work and what's the problem with socialism and stuff like that, but it's another thing entirely to inspire someone to something. There it is. Yeah, that's a great book.
Yeah, there, yeah, yeah, okay, that's cool. Thank you for bringing it up. I'm always looking for new content to read. So thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, my hope is that we don't have to, hit rock bottom. I mean, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I share this story often that part of my journey, like they say in the 12-step program, that you don't have to go all the way to the bottom, but pain is typically the touchstone for change. And it seems like that's how human beings tend to learn is through that sort of pain and experience. Because right now, I think, by and large, people are pretty comfortable with where things are at in their lives. It's not great, certainly not. Like costs are going up and stuff like that, but we're not feeling it en masse quite yet, although it's coming. And I don't. I just want to keep on talking about it because I want to try to connect the dots for people as much as possible, that it's not isolated. We're not operating in silos here. Everything is pretty much interconnected with this agenda, with this religion, if you want to call it, this political ideology, this cancer that is, has infected our society. And even though I do feel like I'm black pilled more often than not these days, and wonder like what the heck is the point, that I'm reminded that these messages are I don't know what it, when the light bulb goes on for somebody, it's usually at the most in an innocuous way. you you've probably heard the message over and over and over again, but they said resonated with you on this particular instance, and that, I guess, is what I'm hoping to achieve
Right.
by continuing to talk about all of these things, that would, if people stumble upon this, that they will hear a message that resonates with them and that they can relate to their own lives, because without that relatability, I think people are still quite disconnected with it. And so what do you think what do you expect to happen with this legal case with the Law Society?
Well, I don't want to say that. I mean, here's what I hope. I hope the lawyers for the Law Society have to read the materials and grapple with it and start to come up with counter arguments and realize there's actually something substantively problematic with the Law Society's politics. I hope that. Which means convincing a few probably fairly powerful lawyers that there's a serious problem. I hope very much to get in front of a judge that gives this some serious consideration. Obviously, I hope that the judge will find in our favor and will strike down the Law Society's entire woke, program. I think, though, more realistically, I hope that it makes people start to think about, what's this Roger Song on about? Why does he care about this stuff? And, hopefully get them to understand that, oh yeah, I guess when I hire a lawyer, I do hope that they're there for me, that they're not there for some political objective. I hope that when I hire a lawyer, they're well educated in civil rights and willing to stand up in court and protect mine. So, I think the most important thing we are likely to achieve is some level of education. I think that if we get lucky in our judge, or in our court of appeal, or in our Supreme Court, which, when I say lucky in the Supreme Court, I don't know how that's going to happen. I think
That's
that,
going to be a miracle, I think.
yeah, I mean, I haven't done the math recently, but Justice Moreau's appointment doesn't do anything good for those metrics. I don't think she's a solid liberal Democratic replacement for Justice Brown by any stretch. So I think that's a huge loss. Justice Brown is a huge loss. So yeah, that's concerning. But I hope we get a judge that really thinks about this stuff and has the courage to apply the same principles to the judicial protection of the rule of law that they always have.
Well, I hope so too. I've put up on the screen the Council of Alberta Lawyers website again, where there is a place to donate if you go on the website there. Roger is, self-funding it with the help of a crowdfunding campaign that's occurring right now, and so if you go to our website, you'll be able to go to take the link to the Give Send Go, where you, if you feel so inclined, and support this type of work that Glenn is doing. Glenn is representing Roger. Please, they could use all the support they could get. And also, if you want to know more about it, please, about this legal case, please go to the website. And like I said, the information is all laid out there, from basically the challenge of the Law Society down to our advocacy, to the Premier, and then obviously the pleadings are set out here for everybody to take a look at. It's really important, and I don't want to dissuade people from trying to hold government accountable and these institutions accountable. But the point in having this conversation is to, for people to recognize that it's not just a simple one-stop shop kind of fix, and that what we're really up against is it really a systemic problem. But I think that if we can bring light to these very challenging and sometimes dark subjects, that we can overcome what's happening and turn things around.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to mention is that, if you step back and you look at the dynamics and you look at why things are happening the way they're happening, I think you and I recognize that the number one driver of this is the will of those with a lot of money. And so money is hugely important. Money is power. And I think you've seen money warp elections. You see money warping in the US, especially the rule of law and the criminal justice system. And money is very powerful, but we don't need to have boatloads of money to do a lot of good work. A little bit of money goes a long way. And so, I would definitely encourage people to be giving small or modest donations that they can to excellent projects. I think one of them is CAL, and then the other one is the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing for Roger Song without the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. So that's money very well spent.
Yeah. Good, very good point, and thank you for that. Yes, I'm a huge supporter of the Justice Center. They've done some really good work, and an ally certainly for this movement. And so, Glenn, thank you very much for coming on with me tonight. I'd like to have you back again so we can get an update once we have a little bit more information, and as this lawsuit progresses. I think that what you and Roger are doing is very courageous. And like, I know for myself that I have been targeted as a, trying to be canceled. And, but notwithstanding, I feel compelled that we have to keep going, putting one foot in front of the other. For me, I pray to God to give me the courage, and like, as the serenity prayer goes, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And to me, the only thing that I know I can change is me. And so I try to work on that as much as I can every day, and hope that ripple effect can influence other people. So I think you're one of those spirits as well, Glenn, and I'm so glad that I'm able to work with you on these projects, and to call you my friend. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Great chat.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. See you.
Okay, good night.
Good night.